Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. This is our first class in the series for our continuing education series for our ADU training, our ADU specialist program, even though we support all sorts of folks that are interested in the ADU space here. Um, I'm Kelsey. I am the ADU training coordinator for Earth Advantage. We are the curriculum provider and the designation provider for the ADU specialist designation. We are going to have an hour-long class today. Our instructor is Dan Loesch from DLC Construction in Sacramento. If you haven't run across their social media or YouTube channel yet, I highly recommend um, getting familiar with that. Lots of really great content here, but also super stoked to have him here today presenting for our little ADU specialist and beyond community. Just a few little notes. We do have the Q&A section live. So please, if you have questions, use the Q&A section. As far as today goes, we're going to do the presentation as a whole first, and then take Q&A at the end. So if you want to remember your questions, um, put them in the Q&A and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. There is 1 hour of CE available to those of you who are Earth Advantage brokers or an Earth Advantage professional to maintain your designation. And I'm just going to go over it really quick in terms of the ADU specialist designation. If you are not an ADU specialist, we do offer a designation course that is 4 hours long through Earth Advantage. I will follow up after today's course with an email that distills today's presentation as well as shares more about the ADU specialist designation for those of you who may be interested in achieving that designation through Earth Advantage. It gets you discounts on courses like this and access to courses like this and recordings that we have done in the past to support those who are interested in the ADU industry. I think that is it for me. For any of the designation or admin aspect, please feel free to PM me and in the chat here. Um, and I will be keeping an eye on the chat. But again, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A and I will call out your name at the end of the class for you to ask your question at the end of the presentation. And I think that is it for me. So thank you so much. Thank you, Dan, for being here. And we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Hey everyone, so we're going to do about an hour or so of the backgrounds of these projects, some of the design considerations. My name is Dan Loesch. I've built probably about 20 or 30 of these things to date in the last 4 or 5 years. So we're going to show you some of our pitfalls and the things that we've come across and how to overcome them. We're going to talk a little bit about design. We're going to talk about the construction, the pre-construction. And then at the very end, I've just asked if you guys hold the questions to the end. I think Kelsey was saying about putting them in the Q&A so you have it memorized. And then if you guys want to go ahead and at the very end, either raise your hand on Zoom or I can go ahead and call on people. We can answer some questions. So with that said, let's get started. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of the garage conversion. We're also going to focus mostly on detached garage conversions, and that's because for attached conversions, they're very limited because most of the projects are tract homes, production homes, and they've already maxed out their setbacks. They might have a lot of utilities on the side of the existing garage, so you can't necessarily build out as easily. You have about a 5-foot setback on a lot of these on the side, and you have a 30-foot setback to the front. So usually not as cost effective to do an attached garage conversion. So we're going to focus on the detached garage today. And if you look at most of the detached garages, they were built in the 1920s and 30s for the Ford Model A, which was the most common car built in that era. It's about 13 feet long by about 6 feet wide. So if you open up those doors, those garages were built to be about 12 feet wide, maybe 13. And that's important because as designers, as architects, as engineers, if we only have 12 feet to work with, we have just enough room for a bedroom, and that's about it, right? So on these old garages, we may have to bump out an addition on the side or bump out an addition on the back. We're really shooting for about 15 foot on that width because we want to accommodate a bedroom that's, let's say, 9.5, 10 feet, and a bathroom that's about 5 feet plus your exterior walls. So we really try to get to that 14, 15 feet. Also, optimal viewing space for a television is about 14 feet. So if we don't have those clearances in that existing garage, then we need to move out. Yeah, we're going to show a video here in a minute, but I wanted to talk about just a few of the laws. In 1982, California adopted an early ADU law, but it was weak and left the local government's broad discretionary authority. One of those items was parking replacement. And we couldn't build a lot of ADUs before 2020 because you had to replace every parking spot you got rid of. So that was really something that was jammed up. So in 2020, I'm sure most of you guys are familiar if you're a designer, they allowed that parking replacement requirement to go away. So that was really what allowed for garage conversions. Was now you're getting rid of a garage space and you're actually not required to replace that. So if you guys are interested in more videos on the laws and specific California specific or national laws, our YouTube page is really great for that information. Our handle is @Loesch Construction. We'll go ahead and put that in the chat at the end so you have the spelling and you can check that out on YouTube. So go ahead and give us a subscribe if you're interested in that information. We're going to do our first video here. All right, so this video is on the most affordable way to build a garage ADU in 2025, which is a garage conversion.
One of the biggest advantages of a garage conversion, the bones are already there. You've got the foundation, the walls, and the roof, meaning you're saving thousands right off the bat on construction costs. You're not starting from scratch like you would for a detached new build. That alone makes this type of ADU one of the most budget-friendly options. Another major win, since a garage conversion isn't technically a new build, you're not required to install solar panels under California's Title 24 code. That can save you anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 right there. And it doesn't stop there. Existing utility connections can often be tapped into, saving you money on trenching and infrastructure. Because you're working with an existing structure, garage conversions often get permitted faster and built quicker, sometimes in as little as 3 to 4 months, depending on the scope. Time is money, and faster build times mean less stress, earlier rental income potential, and much more time enjoyed with the family or potential office use. Garage ADUs are perfect for long-term rentals, Airbnb, aging parents, or even your home office or studio. You're turning underutilized space into something livable and income producing. In Sacramento's hot rental market, it's a game changer. And with typical construction costs lower than a detached unit, your return on investment is even better. In summary, garage conversions are the most cost-effective ADU type because 1, the foundation and structure already exist. 2, utilities are nearby, so you can save big on trenching and connections. And 3, you're building within your existing footprint. No extra permits or setbacks or new zoning requirements. And also 4, you're not required to install solar since it's not considered new construction under Title 24. All of that adds up to major savings, typically $20,000 to $50,000 compared to adding a detached ADU from the ground up.
All right, so that was one thing that we talked about was the utilities and the Title 24 requirements and the difference between a remodel and a new build, right? You have a much lower barrier to entry in the permitting process, and we've done analysis on what a new build would cost versus a detached ADU at about 600 square feet, and we found that our clients save about $35,000 to $40,000 because of the savings in no photovoltaic is required, and there's also a lot less rules when it comes to permitting. So these make these projects in the Sacramento area cost effective for a rental property. If you talk about a new construction ADU, it's actually going to be significantly easier just to buy a duplex, right, and rent that out. You're going to make a lot more money on that. So this really changes the game for people that are looking to do an ADU for an actual rental property. We're going to talk about the overview of the structure of this now. We're going to talk about the cost difference between the two. The first being the foundation. the wall framing, and then the roof reuse. Typically, when we go into one of these projects, the foundation is one of the first things we look at. We look at the existing slab. In the Sacramento area, we have issues with our soil heaving the existing slab, so we're going to look at if there's significant cracking, if we need to replace the entire slab. Also, just so you know, these existing garages don't have a vapor barrier. So when you're considering what you're doing on top of these slabs, if you're reusing the existing, you're going to need to do some sort of either a visqueen on top, or you have to do an epoxy coating. So at a certain point, if you have a ton of slab heaving, or if it's just not in good shape, it's heavily pitched, you might want to consider saw cutting around the perimeter and then just installing a brand new slab with a vapor barrier rated for vapor transmission. Also, the walls in a lot of these projects, they're 100 years old. The construction standards weren't what they are today. We've had some of these with the walls are 3 or 4 inches out of plumb, and we've had to ratchet strap these things back in, take the entire roof off, and try to straighten out these walls as best we can. They're rarely square, so there's always some small issues with this. But like I said, if you're saving $30,000 or $40,000, you have to expect that you're going to have some existing issues, right? So also, when we're taking that roof system off, you might see an old stick-framed roof that is only 8 feet tall. Remember, back in the day, they'd only make these things about 7'6", these garages, or 8 foot tall. So a lot of our clients want to have that raised ceiling feeling, but we're not going to be able to, if we're keeping the existing walls in place, we're not going to be able to raise those top plates more than a couple of inches. Typically, we'll add about 2 top plates on top, and that's the most our local jurisdiction is going to allow us to have. So we will then go ahead and peel off all of the roof framing. We'll use scissor trusses or some type of a vaulted ceiling, whether it's stick framing with a beam or whatever. We try to get that extra foot to 2 feet of ceiling so it feels a lot bigger. We'll do skylights and other things as well right between the trusses. But you'll typically see on our projects, we're doing a lot of truss framing on these just so you can get that extra ceiling height. And then now we want to talk about Title 24. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with Green Energy Code. In California, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. We have what's called Title 24, which is the requirements for insulation and different energy saving measures like your HVAC system. And these are our Title 24 summary sheets. So this on the right is a new build project. So these are the summary measures that we have to have in California for these, and the one on the left is a garage conversion. So you can see the one on the right, we are required to have a photovoltaic solar system of 2.8 kilowatts minimum. California, that can run $15,000, $16,000. And you can see on the left, there is no photovoltaic requirement. You can also see there's a ton of HERS inspections. So HERS inspections, if you're not familiar, this is like what you see on the East Coast where they do the blower fan test on the door. They make sure everything's sealed up. We have one in California, what's called a quality insulation inspection, where they're going to check to make sure that there's no compression in the insulation. They're really stringent about air leakage in homes, so they want to see any gaps that are in the sheathing that are 1/8 of an inch or bigger that are caulked and sealed. So that can be a pretty arduous process, and you could pay potentially another $1,000, $2,000 just in consulting fees getting all this complied with. So that's a big factor as well. You can see that we have a water heater that is a tankless water heater on the new construction that has a 0.98 efficiency factor. Now that's very hard to get. That's very specialty. That's something that you typically have to have special ordered, could take several weeks. And if you look on the left here, you can see we have none of those HERS requirements. So this is the difference between going with a garage conversion remodel and going with a true new build, new construction, right? You can see the barrier to entry is much lower on the garage conversion. Okay, so now if we talk about schedule comparisons, I'm going to stop sharing. A new build could take 7 months. Our garage conversion projects are typically running about 4 to 5. That's because we don't have to take down a lot of the framing. We can keep things as is. Sometimes if the slab's good, the foundation's good, the utilities are already really close by, we can get it done in more like 3 to 4 months. So definitely a ton of cost savings with the garage conversions in the sense of you can get it done cheaper, but you can also compress that schedule so you can bring in a tenant 2-3 more months than you would in a new construction ADU. Some of the pitfalls that we've had on these garage conversions have been with utilities. Actually, a vast majority of them are with utilities. Some of our projects are in older neighborhoods where we have overhead lines in the backyard. I'm going to show you guys one right now where we had a power pole situation. So this is actually the ADU that we built. We did a garage conversion in the middle right there where the yellow circle is, or orange circle. That is where we wanted our new metered panel for the ADU. And you can see this red circle right here was where their existing power pole was in the neighbor's yard. And it goes all the way to where the panel is in the blue circle on the main house. Well, you see the problem there. It actually goes over an active swimming pool to the main house. So our local utility company, what they wanted us to do was try to run a wire from the red all the way to the orange and then backfeed the main house. So that way they could stay at least somewhat away from that pool. They basically wanted us to upgrade or modify what they had existing to the main parcel because it was like, hey, we're doing construction, let's just get everything up to code and up to snuff. The problem with that is that was going to cost an extra $10,000, $15,000 to do all the trenching, to do a panel upgrade on a panel that they just had redone a few years ago on the main house. And so we were able to talk the local utility company into doing a new power pole there at that green circle there. So they installed a brand new pole. They took out a tree. They did not charge the client. With our local utility company, it's publicly owned. So as far as certain aspects, they will pay the cost, but you know, they're not going to pay the cost for other things like upgrading your existing panel. So you're on the hook for that in Sacramento, and it ended up saving us about $10,000, $15,000 in the end by having them put in that new green pole. So that's something to think about, is where the existing overhead lines are running. That ends up throwing us for a loop on all of our projects. So what we have implemented is a pre-construction period before we start, where we go through and talk to the utility company before we have permits and say, hey, what's the option here? What's the option there? So that way we can give an accurate price to our clients. And if you're going to be building something like this as a designer, I would highly recommend talking with the utility companies and seeing what's allowed in your jurisdiction, because they may look at your site and actually want you to upgrade the main panel to the existing house. Another problem is the zero lot line issue. So you can see right here, we are right on that fence line there. So we built this back part as an addition, and this was the existing garage portion right here in the front. So we had to build this in the neighbor's yard. They had a lattice, and we had to cut the lattice down. They wanted us to maintain all of the foliage they had on the lattice. We knocked it down, and then we brought it back up after construction. We had to do a 3-coat stucco system on the outside, which is prescriptive for a 1-hour firewall. And then on the inside, we did a 5/8 Type X gypsum with a certain screw pattern. Now, you can go with that proprietary 1-hour firewall like we typically do on our zero lot lines, or you can look through the USG catalog. USG is a manufacturer of gypsum, and they have 1,000 different fire-rated assemblies that you can comply with. You can even get regular siding to work, but you usually have to do some sort of a gypsum exterior below that. I'm going to play a video of a project that we did a few years back where we had a lot of issues with the existing construction. We had a really poor foundation, and we had a lot of framing that was poorly done that had to be fixed.
And behind me, we're going to show you a couple of those little interesting details and challenges we had to overcome. All right, so one challenge on this project was the existing foundation was about 1 inch off. So you can see we actually had to pour up to the existing sill plates. We were able to put some flashing on there, and we're going to throw some new sill plates on top. This is really, really important in getting a level slab, so that way we can match our plate heights, and when it comes time to do trusses, everything's perfect. You can see behind me we have a very interesting roof profile. Not only do we have a pitch ceiling for a larger feel, so an open concept, creating more space in a small area, but we've also got an offset ridge condition. And the ridge is the center point of the roof. And we offset that so that way we could avoid the power line above. We didn't want to have to raise that power line. That would be very expensive to have to install a new mast above to get to that extra 3-foot clearance. So we were able to offset that pitch a little bit, lower that ridge line, and keep with that existing architecture that we had before. We snuck into the neighbor's backyard. We got about 2 hours for, hey guys, hurry up. We got about 2 hours before they get back. We didn't tell them. No, I'm just kidding. We actually asked for permission to be back here. We needed to work in here to do the stucco wiring today. We're gonna get that all prepped. We're gonna make sure that we protect the neighbor's yard. In land park, you typically have these long, skinny lots, so you have to do what's called a zero lot line. And you can see the stucco wall to my left. It's here for fire protection from the neighbor's yard. So if a fire comes up, you've got a full hour before it catches and falls down. You can have the fire department come out in due time. So we really want to make sure that we do this correctly and we protect the neighbor's yard, because oftentimes there's a lot of frustration between neighbors. There's battles and fights and arguments. And so we want to make sure we keep that to a minimum by asking for permission and treating the neighbor's yard like we treat our own.
All right, so that's a really good point there at the end. There's usually a lot line issue on every one of these projects. You're going to either bump in an addition because the setbacks are so small on California state law. If you're building in California, the rule is 4 feet. A local jurisdiction cannot impose a setback that's more than 4 feet. Sometimes the front setback, if depending on where you can build the ADU, they can enforce that. But as far as the backyard and the side yard, there's been a lot of contention in certain neighborhoods in Sacramento, like in East Sacramento, where people are building 2-story ADUs and they're looking right into their backyard neighbor's pool. And, you know, you can't really build anything tall enough to block that view. So there's privacy concerns. There's also parking concerns as well, because we don't have to replace the parking spots. You may have new tenants or 2 ADUs where you've got 3 or 4 additional cars that are a parking issue. But just know that before we start these projects, it's always best to talk to a neighbor, because you're probably going to be working in their yard or near their yard. And there's going to be some disruption to their lives, right? So that's something to consider before you start. And then understanding the qualities of what you need for that zero lot line, what you need for your firewalls. It has to be protected both outside and inside. All right, so then for permitting, we're going to talk about the evaluating the suitability for the ADU conversion. A lot of these projects we'll look at probably 2 out of 3 and say it doesn't make sense to do because the size is too small. There's not enough yard clearance for an addition. The layout is kind of weird, or we have to take out so many walls that now it classifies as new construction. I know you've seen back in the day in Southern California, they would do full house remodels and they would just keep the chimney up and that would classify as a remodel. But nowadays, some of these jurisdictions are getting hip to that, and you can't take out more than 50% of these of the existing walls, or 60%, or whatever the number is. Once you take out more than a certain amount of walls, they're going to call that new construction anyway. So at that point, it doesn't make sense to do a garage conversion. Just tear it down and do a whole new build. Also the size. Let's say you have a 7-foot ceiling height. There's not a whole lot we can do with a 7-foot ceiling height, especially if we need to go up on the slab. If the slab's really messed up and you've got tall stem walls, you know, at that point, it might be worth it to think about building new. Also access, because these garage ADUs are usually on a lot line and you have a side yard access to them, it's really hard to get trusses in, large equipment, skid steers for doing the grading work, the foundation work. And so you want to evaluate if you have enough room to be bringing a full construction crew in and out every day, as well as just permanently, right? So you want to make sure that your tenant, whether it's your mom or your someone you found on Airbnb, they can get in and out of there and you still maintain your privacy on the main residence, right? So if you don't have much access, we've had some projects where the access is literally 3 feet on the side yard, and it's not an ideal situation. So those are the things that you want to think about before you start. And if it doesn't make sense, then it doesn't make sense. Attached versus detached garage implications. So we talked earlier about attached garages. And I would say 9 out of 10 of these, it doesn't make sense to do anything with. Most of the production homes, they put all of the utilities on that side garage wall for ease of access. They put the metered panel there. They might put a photovoltaic inverter there, or the water heater. And so then now you have to move all of that just to do a small bump out in your side yard, right? And most garages might only be 350 square feet. For most of our projects, if we're shooting for a single bedroom and a single bathroom with a living space that's like an open concept kitchen, we're really shooting for about 500 square feet. But one of the smallest ADUs that we've ever done was 360, and it was a pure studio. Just enough room for a bathroom, and then everything else was one room. Very tiny. So there's not a ton you can do with these attached garages. You're basically just making it a room with a small kitchenette and a bathroom. So change of use considerations and life safety requirements. In Sacramento, they've now basically said that if you're going to convert a garage from a type U utility to a type R3, which is residential, we need to make sure that we look at all the existing framing and see if it's up to code, which the framing from 100 years ago is definitely going to not meet today's requirements. You could have issues where back then a 2x4 could have spanned 13 feet because it was old growth lumber. You'll notice in some of these videos that I'm going to show you, you'll see that that old growth lumber is like a dark brown with a very tight grain. And then new growth is almost like a yellow or a tan, and it has a much looser grain. So it's not going to span nearly as far. So they're going to want to see that you've designed or you've retrofitted all of the existing framing if you are keeping that roof to meet today's standards. So you're going to most likely be scabbing on 2x6s on a 2x4s, or adding collar ties or rafter ties, something to reinforce that existing roof. I'm going to show you a video right now of a project where we kept the existing roof in, and we were just able to reinforce it and do some faux beams. This was that 360 square foot ADU that I was talking about. We also had some utility tie-in issues. So I'll show you that right now on my screen share.
And these old garages are detached. They're typically in the backyard. They're not being used for much other than just storage. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take this project and we're going to convert it into a usable space that the homeowner can have instead of this old 100-year-old falling down structure. So in order to do that, we're going to need to reinforce the framing. We're going to thicken it up for newer insulation standards. We're also going to enter at the front of what was the garage into a new patio door with large windows throughout the structure. We're going to have a large bathroom in the back corner, and then we're going to have a small kitchenette on the back right corner. This project is going to now fit these clients' needs for their growing family and also for entertaining guests and family. Some challenges we anticipate on this project are the old framing. We need to find a way to make this feel bigger and also keep it from falling down. Right, typically you'll see a detached garage with some ceiling joists. This one only had a couple of small braces. The entire roof system was starting to sag, so we beefed it up with these new collar ties. These guys are 2x8s that we sandwiched on some of the rafters, and that's going to keep this existing roof structure from falling down, and it's going to allow us to pitch the ceiling in a way that looks aesthetically pleasing. Another unique challenge on these old existing lots for these ADU builds is the electrical tie-in and also other utility tie-ins. But for this project, we're going to have to tie into the existing electrical pole on the back neighbor's backyard. We're going to tunnel in underneath the fence, and we're going to go up into what we call a vault. That is a underground junction box which ties into the pole above.
So luckily that project had fairly nearby utilities. That's one problem that we have on a lot of these projects is when we start looking through pre-construction, we notice that the utilities are 75, 80 feet away, right? We're in the back of the house and our sewer tie-in is in the very front yard, which can be a problem because the city of Sacramento and a lot of other jurisdictions, they interpret that all structures need to be independent plumbing, meaning your sewer line has to tie in past the existing house. What they don't want is they don't want that the existing house, let's say it ties into the main house and there's a backup. Well, there's a backup at the main house and your ADU now, as opposed to if you tie in before the main house. So if you're thinking about it like a tree, you have to tie into the trunk instead of one of the branches. And so that can be a problem if you're tunneling around the main house and you've got a lot of flat work, you've got a lot of landscaping and other obstacles that you have to get around. And sometimes even the pitch of that's a problem. Let's say that you have a sewer tie-in that is 150 feet away and you have a 3-inch line, you have to have a 1/4 inch drop or slope per foot. So let's say it's 100 feet. I think that's what a 20-inch drop, right? So now you're talking about roughly a 2-foot drop and you're already a foot down because of the geometry of the drain, right? So now you're at 3 feet in order to tie in at the front of the house, and the existing sewer might only be 2 feet deep. So in that case, we have to do what's called an injection pump, a sewer injection pump, which is something that you see in like a basement, right? Where it will actually pressurize the sewage, it'll grind everything up, and it'll shoot it out in a pressurized line. And you can run that, through your backyard. But that's an additional $5,000 or $6,000 minimum, in addition to all the trenching that needs to be done, right? So that can be a real big game changer in the very beginning of the project. We're talking about a lot of fixed cost here. So what do we have left to reduce cost on? If the client's budget is, let's say, $200,000, and we now have $50,000 in utility tie-ins, well, that doesn't leave them much for cabinetry or a really nice floor finish or whatever the variables are on these choices. So in pre-construction, it's really important that we have a plumber come out and camera the existing sewer line. We have an electrician come out and meet with the local utility company to see what our options are. If we have to go underground with the electrical, that's much more expensive than if we just do an overhead drop. And so you'll see that is probably one of the big drivers on whether or not we can do these projects or not, is how the utilities lay out. Fire separation we talked about a little bit earlier. We talked about access as well. The parking replacement considerations we also talked about. That's a big issue in Sacramento, leads to a lot of contention. I would say if you don't have enough room for parking on this and you have to have a tenant park a block and a half away, is that really something that you would want to live in as a tenant? What's that going to do to your rents, especially in Airbnb, where people can go in the comment section and write about how their stay was. So that's something to consider before you even start as well. Permitting challenges as far as scope and budget. We don't know what these projects cost until we get through permitting. There could be some new requirement that a local jurisdiction has that adds $10,000 to this. We recently had one where we had to get a separate permit for the arborist to come by to tear down a tree. That was a very long process, and it cost thousands of dollars to get an oak tree taken down in their backyard, right? Now, you might not factor in that extra $5,000, $6,000 for that separate permit, right? And if you don't know what it costs up front, then you're hosed, right? So we want to make sure that we add a little bit of contingency, maybe 10 to 20% before we go into permitting, just to make sure that they're not going to add anything that's going to blow up this project as far as you can't get a loan or finish the project as far as budget constraints. So we talked about the old growth lumber versus the new growth lumber. When you are designing these, consider that we have long stretches of wall that are untouched, and now you're going to be adding windows into them or doors or different openings because you want to let a lot of natural light in. The issue with that is if you're going to be taking out more than 10% of that existing wall, let's say you have 30 feet of continuous wall, you can only take out 3 feet of that 30 feet before having to have that engineered for a shear wall. So that means a lot of times you're going to be taking off a ton of stucco or extra siding in order to put a shear wall up. And if you've got hold downs that you need to install on an existing foundation, that can be very tricky. It might trigger a special inspection. So we have to try to limit the amount of windows that we put in on these projects, or at least optimize them. You'll notice that we have these big garage portals in the front. We usually fill those with French doors or large windows, and that's how we let a lot of that light in, because we don't have to re-engineer a shear wall on that front wall. So we want to try to keep as much of the existing stucco or siding up on these projects, because that's one of those cost drivers, right? Is how much siding are we doing? If we could limit it to doing 30% as opposed to 90% of the siding, then we've saved probably $10,000 right there, right? So we also talked about the slab replacement. Our rule of thumb on slab replacement is if there's a gap bigger than a 1/4 inch with about 3/8 or so of heaving, at that point we need to get rid of the slab. So we don't want to have a situation where we've done all this beautiful finish work and then 2 years later it settles and now you've got a big hump in your floor, or you have an issue where you have hollow spots in your floor, and everywhere you walk on it the seams start to bust because it's just an LVP product, or it's a hardwood floor that separates. So we want to make sure that If we see a significant amount of heaving or slab separation, we're going to go ahead and just get rid of that entire slab. We're going to install everything as if it was a brand new slab with gravel, with a vapor barrier, and all of the rebar that goes with a new slab. So most of these old projects, there's zero rebar in them, or there's just a very thin welded wire mesh. Let's see, we're going to play a video now of a 100-year-old ADU project where we were able to incorporate some extra storage in the trusses. We were able to raise the ceilings up a bit and optimize their budget through a ductless HVAC system.
So for this project, we're going to convert an old garage that's detached from the main house that's currently being used for storage of long-term items. They're not even parking a car in there. This is going to be now her home office, and it's also going to serve as an area that they can bring family members over for weeks at a time. They can stay, they can cook their own meals, a true ADU in addition to this home office. We're also going to accommodate their storage needs, and we're going to be putting a small owner storage closet in the front area of this project. So the first thing that's going to be needed is a complete refinish of the slab. The existing slab is 100 years old. The soil is very poor in the area, so there's a lot of heaving. There was never any reinforcement installed. So we need to go ahead and cut all of the existing concrete out. We're going to demo all of that. There's actually some leveling issues too. One side of this garage is 3.5 inches approximately taller than the other side. So we're going to level all that out and create a brand new surface exterior foundation for this project to sit on. We're only going to be keeping the exterior wall on the fence side and then some of the exterior wall on the left side, and then we're going to be completely reframing the roof so that way we have a nice pitch ceiling. Because we're only able to work with 500-600 square foot of space, we need to make this thing feel a lot bigger than it actually is. So in that case, we run scissor trusses on the top. We're going to be creating that pitch ceiling underneath so that way the center of your ceiling is about 10-11 feet tall. It's going to feel really big. We're also going to be punching in some exterior skylights in the roof. That's going to add a little bit of natural light and create that airy feeling that maybe you're outdoors or you're in a larger room than you actually are. The front entry room is going to be the kitchen / dining living area. We have a beautiful set of white shaker cabinets that we're going to be putting in. We have a nook area in the front where they're going to be used to entertain and guests are going to eat their breakfast. And then as we go into the back, you're going to see that we're going to build this nice bedroom / home office for her. She's going to put a Murphy bed in the back so that way she has room when it doesn't need to be a place for sleeping, and yet it'll fold down and then it'll accommodate your cousins or parents or whoever they're going to be having stay. There's also a very large guest bathroom in the space. There's a 5-foot by 12-foot bathroom that we're going to be putting a beautiful tiled surface on the walls. We're going to be doing a nice tiled finish on the floor. It's going to be extremely waterproof, clean, easy to maintain. And then we also have a very large walk-in closet, approximately 4 by 4, which is very big for an ADU project. You often don't see that in a project of this size because there's just not any room for it. But this will serve for a small area of storage, and they can put some clothes and some other things for guests. As you walk into the front of the structure, past the kitchen where we are going to put our laminate flooring, LVP waterproof flooring, you're going to see that we did an exterior match of the existing structure.
So you guys will notice all of that old growth lumber that we were talking about earlier on the existing structure, how dark it was compared to the newer stuff, right? And you know, back in the day, they would just let a tree grow naturally, and now we've got trees that they need to grow much faster. So our forests are essentially expedited. The difference between the seasons is much less. So you can't get that tight grain that we used to have. So essentially our lumber is 30 or 40% weaker than it used to be. But we had to modify that project quite a bit because of that difference in height. One corner was probably about 3 inches higher than the other. The slab had settled significantly. So we ended up basically adding 2 plain down top plates on top of the existing top plates. And we created this cool level surface, this tabletop that we could now run our trusses on. And so in the end, it ended up being perfect, but it was only because we were able to pour that complete slab and we were able to add on the top plates, you know, tapering. If it was 3/4 off over here, we added 3/4. If it was a quarter high here, we brought it down a quarter. And so we were able to get that nice tabletop. But you can't do that unless you can take the entire roof off. right? So that's something that needs to be considered as well, is how much are we spending on taking the entire roof structure off and building all new. I'm going to show you another video now. It's the top 5 hidden costs that can make your ADU $40,000 or more expensive. So these are some things that you probably didn't think about before, but you need to be adding on your design checklist when you're in the design phase on your ADU.
First big decision, are you going gas or all electric? From a pure construction cost standpoint, all electric is usually cheaper for an ADU garage conversion in California. Gas often adds about $5,000 to $10,000 more to your project. That's because you may need 1, a new gas line trench, 2, meter work with the utility company, or 3, extra coordination and inspections. All electric keeps things simpler. There's no gas trench, fewer penetrations in the building. You can use high efficiency electric systems like heat pump water heaters and mini splits, which California's energy code really likes. And on top of that, California is steadily pushing towards electrification, especially with newer Title 24 requirements. Going all electric today tends to be more future proof. Here's some key takeaways. Number 1, if you're planning a rental ADU, all electric is almost always the best bang for your buck. Number 2, if you got a future tenant who must have a gas range, we'll price that out up front so it doesn't surprise you later. The second big cost driver, how we handle your electrical panel. You basically have 2 main paths. The first path, number 1, add a separate metered electrical panel for the ADU. Or number 2, upgrade the main house panel and add a sub panel for the ADU. This way is often about $5,000 to $10,000 more expensive than the separate metered option. Why can upgrading the main panel cost more? Well, number 1, you're touching the main service for the entire house, which can trigger larger panel equipment, more labor, possible relocation to meet current code clearances, and other problems. Number 2, it often involves more coordination with the utility company. On the flip side, a separate ADU meter can be cleaner in some cases, especially if your existing main panel is older or already maxed out, or you want a clean separation of power for usage between tenants. On every project here at DLC, we start by looking at your existing panel, your ADU load, and your long-term plans. Whether you want a tenant, family, or more just flexible space, then we show you how each route affects both costs and future utility bills. Next up, water service location and distance. This is one homeowners almost never think about, but it has a huge impact on budget because of the trenching. Your cost depends on, number 1, where your water line enters your property, number 2, how far your ADU is from that point, and number 3, the route, depth, and site access we need to get there. In Sacramento, a lot of homes have water service in the front of the lot. That means a backyard ADU might require a long trench all the way from the front yard to the rear. Some neighborhoods, though, have rear alley service, which can seriously shorten the run and save money. Here are the rough numbers for water runs to an ADU. Under 20 feet, around $3,000 to $5,000. 20 to 100 feet, around $7,500. Over 100 feet can cost you $8,000 to $15,000. So simply, where the city put your water line can swing your budget by 10 grand. This is why we always do a detailed site walk and utility locate early in the process before we finalize layout, so you're not hit with surprise trenching costs later. And number 4 is similar, but usually a bit more expensive: sewer location and distance. Again, we're looking at where the sewer line is located, how far it is from the ADU, the depth and route of the connection, and whether or not we can keep everything gravity fed or if we need an injection pump. Here's some typical cost ranges for sewer connections. Under 20 feet, look to spend about $4,000 to $5,000. 20 to 100 feet, around $8,500. Over 100 feet can often cost you $9,000 to $16,000. In many Sacramento neighborhoods, the sewer is at the front of the property, so backyard ADUs need a longer trench. But if you're lucky enough to have rear alley sewer lines, your route may be shorter and much cheaper. Sewers located near trees, driveways, or tight side yards can also really complicate things. Sometimes the ADU layout or exact placement can be nudged a bit to shorten these runs and save thousands. Heck, you can even save up to $5,000 just by not having to do an injection pump.
So, I wanted to reiterate just how important that is to have a good game plan when you're talking about utilities. The 4 main utilities: your water supply, your sewer, your electrical, and your gas, right? So all 4 of those things, or at least 3 of those 4 things, need to be going to your ADU, and you have to discover exactly where all your existing components are. When we talk about our electrical panels, Right now in the state of California, the insurance industry is not insuring commercial properties with Zinsco panels. So if you're doing one of these projects on a 100-year-old home, chances are you have a Zinsco panel that probably needs to be replaced anyway, right? And these older panels don't have a lot of slots. So at that point, you might not even have room, even if you do have the amperage, to add enough circuits for the ADUs. So that's a concern as well when looking at that electrical panel. And then the plumbing, like we talked about, you know, that if you've got a septic or you have city sewer, you know, there's a lot that needs to be discussed. If you have a septic, maybe you don't have enough dry wells. Trenching distance, like we talked about, very important. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the HVAC and some of the other mechanical components. When you're talking about building or an existing garage, you only have so much room on one wall. There's the ugly wall, the back wall, or a side wall, a place that you don't go. That's where you want to put all your utilities. Well, there's also issues with utility clearances. Let's say you have a tankless water heater, and that tankless water heater is gas powered. You can't have that within 3 feet of a window. So if, let's say you have 6 feet of continuous space, you might be able to put that water heater right in that 6-foot spot because you have an operable window on your left and a door on your right. Also, as far as your mechanical condenser, your HVAC condenser, you might have clearance issues where you have to have a shutoff and an outlet near that. So maybe you need a whole 45 inches or so of continuous wall for that. So if you have that one back wall and you've got a window or a door, maybe you need to think about putting the water heater in the attic if that's possible, or potentially doing a different type panel, maybe a panel that's on the inside of the ADU, so that way it's hidden in the main bedroom area. And so we just need to make sure that we have enough room for all those mechanical components. So I would recommend having a meeting with your HVAC guy, your electrician, and your plumber all in one go in the very beginning when you're in the design phase, and figuring out what walls you can put all those components on, in addition to figuring out where all your tie-ins are. So finally, we're going to talk about the cost ranges, the budget drivers, and what adds to the project in total. So I'm going to play a video, our last video here, about how much ADUs actually cost. A lot of people will come up to me and say, hey, you know, I've got $70,000 to do an ADU project, simply because they don't know, right? So we're going to talk about these real life examples right now. I'm going to share my screen again. For this garage conversion to ADU project built in 2021, it was 570 square feet at a price of $170,000. Some of the obstacles we faced were a very difficult utility company to deal with. We had to do some trenching that we didn't anticipate. We also built an addition portion on the backside. There was easy sewer tie-in and somewhat difficult gas tie-in. So because of this project ended up being right in the middle of the road for a 500 square foot approximate ADU project. For this project, it was a new build construction, approximately $265,000 in cost, built in 2022. Much different than the other projects in this video. It's a lot bigger, it's 800 square feet, and it also includes 2-bedroom, and it's also a complete new build, which means that we weren't able to reuse any framing, we weren't able to get around the solar requirement for photovoltaic panels, and we also had quite a bit of issues with the site. It was a very big plot, so we had to do a lot of trenching and horizontal boring in order to get the electrical and the plumbing out there. Also had to do what's called a sewer injection pump, because there wasn't enough grade for that to drain into the sewer. So that all added to the cost, plus a ton of cabinetry, which made this project more expensive than some of the others in the video. This workshop to ADU conversion was also one of our most economical projects. At a whopping 636 square feet, the price was only $140,000 for this remodel done in 2020, a time when material prices were significantly more inexpensive than they are today. We also had a very easy time tying into the utilities because it was used as a workshop before. There was an existing toilet with sewer tie-in, and we also had an existing panel that we were able to tie into directly.
This garage conversion to ADU project built in 2023 is very unique from some of the other garage conversion projects in that the amount of framing work and foundation work were very extensive. When we got to the project, we noticed not only was there significant heaving in the existing slab, but it was approximately 3.5 to 4 inches out of level. So we had to cut out the entire existing slab, and we had to pour up an entirely new slab that was perfectly level. And then for the existing framing, 2 to 3 inches out of plumb on each side. So we had to rectify that. We took the entire roof off and framed in all new roof trusses. It was almost like a complete new build with the exception of 2 existing walls. This caused the price to be about $200,000 on this project, which made it more expensive than some of the other garage conversions that you're going to see where we didn't have to do that work on the framing. This project, built in 2023, was a garage to home office ADU conversion with a size of approximately 300 square feet and a cost of $160,000. Although there was significant savings with the nearby utilities, the sewer, the water, and the gas, the high-end appliances, high-end finishes like the finished carpentry beams, and very, very custom cabinets drove up the cost to $160,000. This project was one of our smaller ADU garage conversions, built in 2024. It had the existing 4 walls, the existing slab that we kept, and we didn't touch the roof. There was also a very favorable electrical situation where there was an underground vault that we were able to tie into in the backyard, so we didn't have to mess with getting a new power pole installed or upgrading the existing panel. And it really lent favorably to doing an ADU at a reasonable price because we didn't have to do this extensive work that we normally would on another project. This project is probably our most economical ADU garage conversion / man cave conversion to ADU. It was built in 2024. There were a lot of existing utilities already in this space. There was plumbing. It was actually being used as a habitable space with air conditioning beforehand. We only really had to add electrical. We trenched across the backyard and installed a full 200 amp metered panel on the backside. Plenty of room for future electric vehicles and whatnot. We were able to get a lot of bang for our buck on this project, coming in at about $145,000. We were able to save a ton of money on our prefabricated cabinetry, and other than the electrical panel, this is basically your typical remodel. So that last one was actually a very interesting project because the homeowner really just needed a home office, and they wanted the ADU designation or classification so that way we could be grandfathered in to that those setbacks, right? So certain jurisdictions have very, very small setback requirements for ADUs, and so they basically added a very small kitchen just so they could call it an ADU, and she used it as primarily her home office and a playroom for the kids. So you can see we've talked a lot today about utilities. We've talked a lot about the existing framing and existing slabs and what drives the cost on these projects. We are actually working right now on a cost calculator on our website where we're going to be comparing the costs of a mock project that you might have of a garage conversion or an addition or an ADU. If you are interested in finding out about that cost calculator, you can go ahead and drop your email address in the chat below. And yeah, I'd like to open it up now for any questions that you guys might have. Actually, first before that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and show you some of that cost calculator so you can see how that works. All right, so it's going to give you your steps 1 through 10. You're going to put in what type of project you're doing, and then it's going to show, you know, your square footages, if you want to do a kitchen with 2 beds or 1 bed. And then we're going to go through our builder grade versus mid-grade and designer grade for all of these finishes and the differences between the 3. You know, if you're talking about flooring, your builder grade is going to be something simple like carpet, a cheap LVP, all the way up to designer grade where you're talking about handmade products and custom tile, etc. So we go through doors and windows, we go through cabinets, and whether you're going with a custom cabinet with something like inset hinges or you're just going with a plain white shaker prefab. We've got A to Z, everything in between. And then you're going to be picking up countertop material and bath finishes, etc., etc. So we're going to go through that on this cost calculator if you have a project that you're thinking about building. And then at the end, it'll email you
the approximate price range of your project, and you can see if that fits within your budget. So look for that to come out in the next couple months. And like I said, shoot your email into the chat, and we'd love to share that with you when it comes out. Oh, also, we do have a newsletter for anyone who's interested in receiving updates on some of our projects and how-to videos and different educational materials on ADU builds and garage conversions. So if you're interested in the newsletter, go ahead and throw that email in there and we will go ahead and get you on the list. All right, I'd like to open it up for questions. I'm not sure how this works, Kelsey, as far as hand raising, or if someone wants to go, if you could help me out with that, then I can go ahead and answer some questions.
My question has to do with you're talking a lot about the upfront savings by avoiding a lot of the Title 24 codes or environmental codes for new builds, but do you ever consider or talk to clients about the long-term savings of solar, high quality insulation, high efficiency HVAC systems that cost more now but are going to save money over the long term?
Are you based out of California, Katie?
Yes.
So the one issue that we've had in California with our utility companies is the new net metering agreements, right? As far as cost savings goes, these ADUs, even if you run, let's say, an R30 in the attic and you run an R15 in the exterior walls, we're finding that our utility bills are only about an additional $40 to $50 per month with SMUD, our local Sacramento-based jurisdiction. And if you're somewhere like in Yolo County where I live, PG&E might be $200 for that same bill, right? So it will make sense in certain jurisdictions for you to have a photovoltaic system, but especially if you have a battery backup, right? So some of our clients will be adamant about doing a photovoltaic system, and we'll actually avoid penetrations on the roof on the south side so we can do a full photovoltaic system with a battery backup. And but for a lot of our clients, it doesn't make sense because either A, there's a significant amount of large trees in their backyard, or B, they're with SMUD, our local utility district that's very inexpensive for energy savings. So if you're talking about, let's say that you double up on your insulation, you've got an R60 in your attic or an R57, and you've got the high efficiency water heater, and some of the other measures, that could be $25,000, $30,000. Well, if it's a savings of $50 a month, that's progressively getting larger. Then let's say at 5% a year, that return on investment might be 20 years, right? And in 20 years, you might have to be replacing most of those components anyway, right? So it's really important that we do that analysis on where they live, and also the benefits of if they have a lot of trees in the backyard, we might actually want to be looking for that solar exemption.
Okay, so that's mostly due to the small size of an ADU, is that it just doesn't
It doesn't.
sorry,
It won't pencil out as much as if you have like a 3,000 square foot home, right? Because to heat and cool a 3,000 square foot home is very expensive.
right. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Hey Dan, thanks for getting on here. I'm actually out in Colorado, but I got on here. We build ADUs out here, and so far we've done all just detached new builds. But Denver sounds similar to kind of the market you're in, where there's a lot of small lots with garages in the backs, and they're really old. So we'd like to get into that. But kind of what you were talking about with when you said you don't know the costs after permitting, that's what I've been having a hard time with, is trying to look at everything before we like get under contract or anything with
Do you have a pre-construction process in place with your company where you charge for your time up front?
So if it's like a detached new build and it's pretty like basic, we'll just do a fixed priced contract up front. But if it's more of like a custom or a little more complicated, then yeah, we'll do a pre-construction with like a $3,000 non-refundable deposit just to kind of go through everything, and they'll pay for the plans. So I was just curious, is that kind of what you guys do? And then do you have to get like as-built drawings for all this stuff? Kind of just like your process on how you're like selling clients. Are you giving them a number like, hey, I think this will be 250 in our pre-construction agreement, or are you just saying like, I got no idea, like let's just get your plans done and then we'll see?
Um, Typically we can have an idea between 20%, right? So a lot of our 400, 500 square foots, unless you're going with something that's high designer grade, which is really not this market, Tate. This is a market of our typical client is we need to move mom and dad in. They're staying at a nursing home, and we want to make it decent, and we want to be able to save a little bit of money. So our ideal client is typically not looking for something that's crazy designer grade. So I can pretty much with good confidence say that, hey, your project's going to be, if it's 400 or 500 square feet, you're taking the roof off somewhere between 180 and $250,000. And then what you're saying about your 3,000 number is probably about right for your consultation, because you're going to be spending either your time or a project manager's time upwards of 60 or 70 hours on this. You're going to be doing probably 6 or 7 trips. Your utility company is going to be very difficult to work with, most likely. They're going to be sending out people on their schedule, not yours. And so you're going to have to be being pulled away from other projects. And so I think up front, if you're honest with the client, you say, hey, there could be $50,000 worth of unexpected costs on this project because of all the different players. Then I think they typically understand. And we charge about 2% of a project's cost in pre-construction, non-refundable.
All right, sweet. And then are you guys putting like for your, kind of your range, are you just doing like a consultation contract almost? Like, hey, I'm going to charge
It
you
is.
10% of this.
Yes, and we are a design build also, so we do the design as well. But for the pre-construction services, I'll send them just a one-page contract, and I'll tell them up front, I think it's going to be between X and Y, and it's usually right in between X and Y, or it's just right on the edge of the higher end. Right. And that way they're prepared. And as long as you present it in the sense of, hey, there's unknowns, this is what we think it'll cost, and are you willing? Is this in your budget? Then there's no hard feelings, and they're at the very end. Maybe they say it's not worth doing, but they're out a few $1,000s, as opposed to they're halfway through construction and you're issuing them change order, and then you get that bad reputation as a builder of that guy who just kept asking for more and more money, right?
And then, sorry, last thing. In Colorado, you guys probably don't have this issue in California, but our foundations have to be insulated here. So I don't know if you've ever run into that, but if you have like a really old, foundation, have you ever had to dig down and then insulate the slab or the stem walls and then?
Yeah, and really the cost of saw cutting and removing for a good concrete guy or a guy that has equipment is not a significant cost. I mean, you might be talking about an additional $8,000 to do what you're talking about. And I would make it a common practice in Colorado to saw cut 4 to 6 inches or 4 to 8 inches off of those stem walls and completely get rid of that base, and then do all the insulation work and all the digging that you have to do at that point. We even had to bring conveyor belts in because of the side yard access. And it sounds like a major ordeal, but for people that have done conveyor belt work or a lot of excavation, it's only a couple of days of work.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Dan.
Yeah.
Hey, Dan, Jared, we were working out of Oregon here, also a design build company. We work on a variable margin for projects. So if it's a really small project, we might be trying to get 50 or even more percent margin off of it. And then for very large projects, sometimes we're going down to around 30% margin. Mm-hmm. Where is kind of your target for these kinds?
We shoot for a gross margin of 35%. And our overhead is about 20%. Sometimes if we can do a lot of projects at once, our overhead may go down to as low as 12%, right? So we've had projects go up to 45% on the gross margin, simply because everything is stacked. Everything's just been perfect, right? But these are not, unless you've done 10 of these, your first several are going to be a lot of surprises because of the existing conditions, right? It's going to feel like you're learning every time, right? So your margins, I would say at first on these, you're probably going to have 25 to 30% margins on your first couple of jobs. And you're going to be undercharging, if anything, on these projects.
And what kind of marketing, if any, at this point are you guys doing to specifically get ADU?
Our campaign right now is called Make Room. make room for mom and dad, make room for your home office, make room for the kids' play space. And we're marketing that as, you know, you have this dead space that you're not using. And now, you know, most of our clients don't use these garages because I don't know if in Oregon they have the older homes with the older detached garages, but they're just not big enough for today's vehicles. They're not big enough for a home gym. So people just put junk in them. They put their Christmas decorations, right? And so I think that the marketing is going to be, hey, you have this space. Let's go ahead and actually make it something that you want to do, you know. But the ADU designation in California is very important because you can get by with those shorter setbacks. We have setback requirements in California that are 15 feet from the back fence if it's not an ADU, right? For many projects. So that ends up kind of being a problem in the end because we're already 10 feet back, you know? So we can't build in that addition. No problem. And then offline, if anyone needs my contact info, I'll go ahead and throw that in the chat. And feel free to shoot me an email. And I can answer any other questions that you guys might have. Just one more note. I'm seeing a lot of interest in the cost calculator on the chat. For these numbers, these are our retail final price numbers. If you are a DIYer or you are another builder, our typical process is to take our job cost and multiply them by 1.5 or 1.6. So if you need to know what a raw material and labor cost is, you can look at those values and divide them by, let's say, 1.5 or 1.6. And that's going to be about what it's going to physically cost you at wholesale.
Yeah, again, if anybody has any questions, that's great. I will share those of you who are interested in the calculator. I will share those emails with Dan so he can get in touch with the calculator option. And yeah, thanks again, everybody, for being here. Thanks again, Dan. Really appreciate it. And best of luck.